Hello everyone, Hamer back with another Mission Impossible episode review as we wind our way through Wacky Season 6 of the original series. This time we are looking at episode 17, which is called Image. So this one starts out with a car bringing Emil Gadsden and his son Tony to the heavily secured and guarded estate of Emil's partner in crime, Thor Coffin. That's some name they came up with. Emil plans to get out of the country with Tony to avoid facing heavy charges and indictments, and wants Thor to continue running their illegal enterprise, which is centered around Emil's list of corrupt politicians that do their bidding in various countries. They seem to come to an uneasy agreement to move forward. Jim gets instructions at a Parks pump house. The mission is simple: get Gadsden's list. We have an apartment scene with an Emil mask and a guest operative named Dave, usual hints at what's to come. Willie sets up a truck outside Thor's estate and digs into the foundation to get into the wine cellar. From there, the electrical and phone panel as usual, while Jim arrives with a rare stamp that he wants to deal to avid collector Thor. Actually, it's a collection of stamps. Willie gets to a closet where Jim signals him, and Willie sets off a security alarm, which Thor's man Hauser checks out, while Willie continues his impromptu renovations and moving about the house, getting into Thor's safe as Thor looks at the stamps Jim has brought. Emil meets with Barney, who poses as his favorite tarot reader, Monsieur Revalier. Barney does a reading in which he says that enemies are plotting against him. That's not a surprise. Tony interrupts briefly for important matters before he is shushed, and Barney warns Emil of danger to himself and a very close relative, not Tony, someone who's more like a brother, which Emil doesn't understand as Tony is the only family he has left. Meanwhile, Dave puts on his Emil mask, so one guess, no prizes where this is going. Emil tells skeptical Tony to get out of the room as Barney says he sees the Corsican sign. Emil has a Siamese twin, and the next tarot card shows death. Barney gives Emil a spiked cigarette, making him suggestible to hypnosis or whatever, and tells him he will see the death card again, and he will react according to Barney's instructions. When Willie tries to leave, one of Thor's men finds him and points his gun at him. Fortunately, Willie thinks fast and is able to fool and subdue the guy, keeping him out of sight for a bit so he can leave. Jim sets off after pricing himself out of a deal with Thor, who discovers his stamps missing from the safe. Emil gets a call from his favorite restaurant, indicating the presence of someone who looks just like him. Emil and Tony arrive, asked to be joined by the stranger who calls himself Professor Gadarats, and his daughter Casey, who are of course intrigued to join them for coffee. Gadarats has some chest pains, and Casey gives him a pill from a small container, which has a picture of the death card. And Gadsden also shows signs of having similar pain. They agree to meet later in the day, with Tony rightfully skeptical of the amazing coincidence all of a sudden. Tony hints that maybe his father should tell him where the list is in case something does happen to him. Emil doesn't think that's a good idea yet. Emil visits Barney again as he and Tony learn about the theft from Thor's safe. As Casey and Dave arrive, Dave, as Gadarats, is whacked and put in the van by a gun-toting Jim and assistant Tom and taken away, with Tony looking on helplessly. He tries to console Casey, bringing her up to the apartment, where Barney flashes the death card again, causing Emil to act as though he took a blow to the head, and he falls unconscious as well. The IMF crew go back to Thor's wine cellar, avoiding Thor's men who are patrolling and trying to figure out how the theft occurred, while Tony calls a doctor who is of course also working with the IMF, and notices a scar on Emil's chest from an accident he had in infancy. The doctor says that such a scar indicates an operation to separate Siamese twins. Emil and Tony realize that Emil was a real target and the professor was taken by accident. Someone wants that list. Barney indicates that the culprit is someone close to Emil and shows him the death card again, making him feel weak as from a beating. Barney sees a wine cellar where it's taking place, and Emil believes it must be Thor, despite Tony continuing to say that this is all a con and all complete nonsense. Barney encourages him to find out for themselves, so Tony is dispatched to Thor's for help, saying that his father was taken. Jim takes Thor's stamps to a dealer, rejecting his offer, and the dealer obviously recognizes the collection and calls Emil about it, who asks for a meeting with Jim. Thor offers to help Tony in any way he can, and the guy that Willie took out earlier goes with Tony. Tony stops him and tells him to take him down to the wine cellar to have a look. They find the professor being tortured for information by Willie and Tom, to Tony's shock. Casey confirms that her father has a similar scar to Emil's, and they were separated as birth, as an ill omen. That's what Barney figures. The death card appears again, and Emil has difficulty breathing. Barney believes that the twins' proximity has caused these sympathetic symptoms to occur. As Tony returns and tells what he found, Tony wants to leave the country immediately, but Barney warns Emil that if his brother dies, he will perish as well. Jim comes back to the stamp dealer's place, finding Emil and Tony there, saying they'll make him rich if he shows them how he got into Thor's place, and he doesn't have a choice. There's a gun pointed at him. Jim agrees to show them the tunnel. They find Dave as Gadarat's in the cellar, who collapses and dies. The death card appears yet again, causing Emil to collapse as well, unable to move. Tony confirms the scar on Gadarat, when Willie and Tom start shooting at them, which Thor overhears. Tony demands the list of the paralyzed Emil, and Emil says it's in a secret compartment in his watch. Willie somehow breaks the hypnotic spell as Thor and his boys come through the tunnel in pursuit. Willie collapses it with a deadfall. Emil emerges onto the street where he sees Dave unmasked and a glum Tony being led away by police, and he soon follows. Mission accomplished. I struggled with the grade for this episode. In going through that recap and thinking about it, I have to give it a grade of an F. But I will say this. I was tempted to give it a grade of a D-. In reviewing everything, I'm giving it an F. However, I will say that with almost certainty that it's the top of all of those that are going to get an F. I was sorely tempted to give it a D-. The reason I was tempted to do so was because at least here we get okay performances, and this is the only thing that's good about this episode. We get okay performances from Warren Stevens as Thor Coffin. Again, I can't get over that name. What a ridiculous name. Couldn't they come up with anything better than that? But anyway, Warren Stevens is okay. And Daniel Travanti, a pre-Hill Street Blues Daniel Travanti, who doesn't use his middle initial and spells his name with a Y. By the time he got to be the star of Hill Street Blues, he changed it to Travanti with an I at the end. He at least is the voice of reason. And that was the main reason why I said, you know what, I guess I should get a D- only because of that. I've changed my mind. I'm going to stick with an F, but this is right at the top of the F list, okay, for what that is worth. And going into 7, I think you're going to see some Fs and D-. I don't think anybody's too surprised at me saying that, so no spoilers there. Anyway, moving on. Let's talk about why this episode deserves an F. There's no new ground covered in this episode in terms of anything that the IMF does or any of the stuff that they pull. The teamwork is the usual and it's fine, but that's not really what's important here. George Voskovec, bless his heart, he tried his best. I'm sure he's a nice man and a fine actor. But the character of Emil Gadsden has all 3 kisses of death for IMF or Mission Impossible villains. Okay? He's lame. I don't think I need to explain this. He's a schmuck. Complete schmuck. Even with Tony right there telling him the whole time, Papa, stop it being ridiculous. Oh my gosh. And he's unengaging. There's nothing that he does or nothing that he says, nothing in the way that he's portrayed that generates any kind of sympathy or any kind of good feeling. I don't find myself caring about this character at all. So that's the biggest problem. All 3 KODs are here. Some of the other things that I found that were bad. The opening scene, I felt it almost right away as the characters started talking. Emil and Tony and Thor and his guy Hauser. the dialogue in that scene is very, very, very strained. And it's very, very deliberate. You know, it's like, well, I'm leaving the country. Oh, yeah, I guess you really do need to leave the country because of that indictment thing. Hey, maybe you should give me the list. No, I won't give you the list, but I really would like to buy your stamp collection. No, I told you before, I'm not going to sell you that stamp collection. You know, it's very much this kind of formulaic and deliberate dialogue, which is very, very strained and contrived. In that 3 minutes or so, it seems very, very clear that the writers want to pile in all of the issues that are going on amongst the antagonists all at once, right? The thing about the stamps, the thing about the list, Emil's belief in the supernatural, Tony and Hauser kind of being, antagonistic to one another, they're being all young and full of, anger towards each other and all of that kind of stuff. Yeah. It was really, really, really not good, and it's a harbinger of what is to come. Normally, that kind of stuff comes out during the episode. The writers said, you know what, for whatever reason, they kind of crammed it all together right in the beginning, and it's really not good. Another thing which is really, really bad, there are way too many contrivances that are required for this plot. The scar, for example. The belief in the supernatural that Emil Gadsden has, his chain smoking, all of that kind of stuff. Everything is just so contrived, and the whole episode just does not come off as genuine. Genuineness and credibility is really lacking throughout the episode. The biggest problem here is this episode is the epitome of the fundamental problem that episodes like this have, where an episode depends on or involves the whole idea of somebody being suggestible or hyper-suggestible. If you can make someone, in this case Emil Gadsden, through the use of drugs, chemicals, hypnosis, whatever method you want to say. If you can make that person amenable to feeling some phantom phenomenon, like a blow to the head, or chest pains, or whatever, on cue, triggered by something, in this case a death card, why not just get them to tell you the information that you want to know? Why go through all of this song and dance and all of this dog and pony show? It's ridiculous. And again, it just comes off so poorly. It beggars belief just as a premise on the whole. But here, the way it's done is just a whole other level. The biggest problem I had with it is, again, just for the purposes of kind of probably hammering this story out, it's not even kind of internally consistent. The use of the death card to trigger, reactions or responses from Emil Gadsden, that's lame enough. But in the end, Willie just says, hey, Mr. Gadsden, wake up. And suddenly that somehow breaks the spell of the hypnosis or the suggestibility that Barney put on him. Not like an antidote that they give somebody sometimes. Not even Barney coming to him and saying, Mr. Gadsden, come out of, the spell that I put you under. What? Willie is just able to say, hey, wake up, and that's it. Obviously this was not thought through, and that's just an example of it. We didn't need that to happen to demonstrate the ridiculousness of the whole issue in this episode, but it certainly serves as a really good example for that, just to kind of, put a bow on that, if you want to look at it that way. The most obvious episode to compare this episode to is The Visitors from a few episodes ago in season 6. They share a lot of similarities in terms of, the way the plot unfolds, the way that the antagonist gets manipulated and all of those sorts of things. There are similarities there. And I mentioned with The Visitors that I gave that one a D-, mostly on the basis of the performance of the character of Kellogg who was played by a guy named Frank Hotchkiss. And the fact that he at least was competent and had a good presence in the episode and was a character that I said, okay, there's a guy who actually belongs on this show. And I kind of do feel that way about Daniel Travanti here as Tony. And that's why I was very, very, very sorely tempted to give this one a D-. With the stuff that I just mentioned about the bad, that's why I'm going to drop this one down to an F. But I had to ask myself, okay, why? I have to hook that onto something, not just what I feel. I'd like to come up with something objective to say why this episode is worse than The Visitors. And here's my explanation for it. I hope it makes sense. In The Visitors, the IMF was creating, or at least embellishing, shall we say, an alternate reality that, was centered around the character of Edward Granger, played by Steve Forrest. It was completely bogus, okay? Complete nonsense. But it was a reality that Edward Granger had kind of composed for himself. He had this idea of himself as being sort of this ubermensch character, that I'm awesome and I should live for 300 years because, darn it, a UFO gave me some power, many, many years ago, and that's why I'm rich and powerful. He created that for himself, and the IMF just kind of went with it. Okay? Here, we don't even have that level of reality. We have here a character in Emil Gadsden who wants to kind of make us buy into the idea that he believes in, which is some kind of plausible reality due to the supernatural. And this is not a commentary on, psychic phenomenon or the use of tarot or card reading or anything like that. I leave that aside. Whether you believe in it or not or whatever, that's not even really relevant. The point is that, especially for the purposes of this episode, rather than being complete hokum that the IMF just kind of latches onto and says, okay, let's go with it, this is completely contrived hokum. This is something that we are supposed to believe on the basis of what transpires in this episode and what also appears to be in the mind of the antagonist. We're supposed to believe that this has some kind of basis in reality, in actual reality. We're supposed to believe that what could transpire here is possible or maybe even probable based on the way that it's laid out. That's what I get out of it. And because of that, that's why I would say that this is worse. Somebody who is borderline delusional the way Edward Granger is, that's one thing. But here's a guy, Emil Gadsden, who thinks that he's actually grounded in reality. He has a chance, and especially since he has a son who's guiding him towards reality every step of the way. That's just a degree, in my opinion, worse than what we had in The Visitors. And that's why I am comfortable giving this one a worse grade. I'm already thinking about the fact that when we get to the revival series, I'm going to have to revisit this issue again. And some of you may have an idea of what I'm talking about. But again, it won't be long before we get there. We're almost done season 6 and then, on to season 7 and then off we go to the revival. But anyway, let's just leave it at that. I'm comfortable giving this grade, giving this episode a grade of F, putting it at the top of that list of the Fs. And I'm pretty sure we're not going to get another one in season 7 that's going to kind of, shake that up a little at all. Anyway, I'm going to call it here. Thank you as always for watching. Always much appreciated. Please like this episode review video for what it's worth. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and please leave your comments. I will see you next time.